Do you control your emotions, or do your emotions control you? It's kind of a good question to ask, isn't it? So many of us, I think, find ourselves at the mercy of this internal war or struggle, trying to do it all externally in the world outside, and yet at the mercy of this internal storm, these experiences that seem to arise out of nowhere and take over our experience of how we feel, what we think, what we do, how we behave. Emotional mastery is a very potent and powerful topic to discuss, and in this episode I want to offer some of my own perspectives and insights which should help you to understand emotional intelligence at a deeper level, why this is such an important thing for us to work on and hone and strengthen, as well as some of the most impactful and powerful skill sets and approaches and ways of thinking about this nuance of personal growth and development, which have helped me and that I've seen validated through thousands of hours of coaching. So if you're new here, my name is Jasper Brown and welcome to The Conscious Masculine. In this episode, we're going to be discussing and somehow deconstructing this idea that emotional intelligence is just a feminine thing, or that it's somehow not that important. Typically men get educated in a certain way, which is that emotions make you weak, they make you feminine, and this is in stark contradiction to what we see in the world today, with women somehow calling for men that are more emotionally aware and in touch with themselves. So we have this kind of necessity to evolve in this direction, and at the same time deep resistances within us. Now, I've experienced this in my own life at many stages, and I'll go into that in a bit more depth and tell you some personal stories very soon. But first, let's deconstruct this idea of traditional strength. Men get conditioned with this notion that to be stoic, to be alpha, to suppress what we feel, and to retain the ability to function regardless of the way that we feel, this is somehow idolized as a typically masculine virtue. And while there is a certain truth there, in certain situations, it does pay to be able to be strong and to be able to push through regardless of the way that you feel. There are moments in life when this is 100% necessary, and sometimes we need to grit down and be able to just tough it out. And at the same time, if we always operate in this way, this is going to lead to many areas of dysfunction. It's going to stop us from accessing the depth of what we feel, the depth of intimacy, the depth of connection with others. And as we move into an era where humanity is in a certain way becoming more conscious, there is an evolution to consciousness. We can see that within the social spheres of inclusivity, equality, the dissolution of prejudice and exclusion, gay rights, racial equality, income equality. All of these issues are starting to be somehow normalized as we move towards a more inclusive world, because as consciousness evolves, we become more loving in a sense. And within that is the necessity or the desire to see others as equal. And emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and emotional mastery is somehow this skill set which enables us to thrive and function in concert with other human beings. It's actually one of the biggest indicators of success in life. It's not traditional intellect, not IQ. Actually, IQ at a certain level becomes inhibitive. Very high IQ individuals actually spend a lot of time up in their head, and that actually prevents them from being productive. The most successful people in the world are often people with high degrees of emotional intelligence, because they're able to create connection, they're able to mobilize people, to influence people, and they're able to manage their emotional states, their energy levels, their inner resources much, much more intelligently. And I will talk about some examples of people with high EQ moving forward. So let's go to a definition of what is emotional intelligence anyway. So in the simplest terms, we can think of emotional intelligence as the ability to understand one's emotions. To be able to be self-aware, first and foremost. To know what it is that we're actually feeling, to be able to put a label onto it. The next component is the ability to manage or regulate our emotional experiences. Do we have some degree of control over what we feel? Can we motivate ourselves with our emotions, or are we somehow constantly at the mercy of what we feel? Do we have the ability to change what we feel? Can we use it as a powerful force that drives us? And the way that I like to think of emotion is emotion, energy in motion. It's the energy or system of the body communicating in a certain way. Almost like this language of the body. Empathy is the next component. Do we have the ability to understand other people's emotions? Can we put ourselves in their shoes? This is just one of the most powerful things we can do if we want to develop healthy relationships, whether that be in business, in a professional setting, or within our intimate partnerships, or within our families. Do we have the social skill set to be able to navigate the complexity of human relationships, which, if you're anything like me, you've discovered, whoa, there's a lot of depth and a lot of complexity there. It's actually one of the most difficult parts of life, is actually managing your relationships with other humans, right? So within emotional intelligence, we see this incredible, somehow encompassing skill set to be able to relate to ourselves, and this language, this internal language of the body, as well as our ability to engage and relate and manage the relationships with other people. So this really is a defining feature of a conscious life, is a deep, deep understanding and relationship with emotion, feelings, and all of the nuances associated with that. Is it something that controls you and dictates the course of your life, and you're just a passenger? Or do you hold the reins, and are you steering the ship or the chariot in the direction that you want to go? Important questions to ask. So in this direction, it's good to understand what are some of the signs of low emotional intelligence. Because in my life, I've had times when I was very emotionally unaware and somehow completely at the mercy of what I was feeling. In my upbringing, in my culture, in my family, there was not a high degree of emotional intelligence. We didn't typically talk about what we felt. Difficult topics were somehow like swept under the rug or covered up with humor, or just worked around in a kind of ad hoc kind of way. And this really stunted my growth, really stifled my relationships. Not only did I have a sort of people-pleasing mentality where I was reliant on others for approval and validation, but I was also somehow emotionally avoidant and would lock up and suppress and bottle up what I was feeling, only to have it explode out in other ways in my relationships. And this led to the destruction of multiple relationships, both intimate and friendship based. So some really important indicators of low emotional intelligence, because this is a good place to start, is to sort of make this distinction between what is emotional intelligence, how can we see if we are underdeveloped in this sphere, and then we'll go into what we can do to actually start improving our emotional intelligence as a way forward. So first of all, the first sign of low EQ is poor emotional awareness. As I described with myself, are you able to label and actually identify what it is you're feeling in your direct experience? Can you put a name to it? Can you articulate it? Can you make sense of what you feel? If you can't, obviously, you're going to be at the mercy of your emotions. The next sign is difficulty managing your emotions. So do you explode with fits of anger or rage? Do you sink into a depression that you cannot drag yourself out of? Are you tremendously ashamed by the things that you've done and been unable to integrate that or unable to face the truth? A lack of empathy is the next sign of low emotional intelligence. Do you struggle to understand other people's experience? Do you struggle to put yourself in their shoes? Is it hard for you to relate to someone on an emotional level? Impulsive behaviour is the next one. So when we're very impulsive, we somehow have this almost instinctive reaction to doing things, creating things, reacting in a certain way, explosively, impulsively. Gambling, drug addiction, porn addiction, social media addiction, making rash decisions, being very impulsive and not really being able to sit with, think about, and reach a sort of discerning decision. Poor social skills. So do you struggle in social environments? Do you struggle to make deep connections? Do you struggle to manage your relationships? If you really struggle in social settings, this is a sign of a lack of emotional development. Resistance to change. If you're very stuck in your ways, very cemented in a specific way of looking at the world or way of feeling, and you hate exposure to new things, obviously the opposite being a high openness towards change and new experiences, which shows that you have the emotional capacity to manage that and handle that and welcome those new things. Difficulty handling stress. If you find yourself getting overwhelmed easily, getting burnt out, going until finally your body shows signs of massive distress and you just simply collapse. Your body shuts down, you get very sick, you get ill, you have weird accidents that start to appear. You get overwhelmed easily by small situations or something someone says or someone cutting you off in traffic, and you suddenly like scream in rage and express this bottled up emotion that's been bubbling away inside of you. Blaming others is another great sign. So projecting all of your stuff outwards and not having the ability to take responsibility for what you feel and what's happening inside of you and your reactions to things. A limited degree of assertiveness shows low emotional development. So you struggle to stand up for what you think, what you feel, what you believe. You're at the mercy of other people telling you what to do. You have weak boundaries and the inability to fight for your needs to get met. And lastly on this list is poor conflict resolution. This was a big one for me, because at the heart of any conflict is an emotional experience. Usually quite an intense emotional experience that is difficult to manage. It's complex. You have an internal storm. There's an internal storm in the other person that you're having the conflict with do you have the emotional awareness to navigate that, to pull it apart, to hold your experience, to contain your experience and be able to make sense of it, as well as the experience of the other person? Because that's necessary if you want to develop skill within conflict resolution. So that requires a high degree of emotional intelligence. And we'll be talking a lot about that on this channel. I want to share a lot of wisdom and insights on this topic and teach you guys how to approach this in a way, approach conflict resolution to have better relationships, to have a better life. That's what this channel is all about. So within this, maybe you've seen signs or recognize certain areas that stand out to you where your emotional intelligence is perhaps lacking somewhat. You have room for development, and that's okay. That's totally okay. We all start from somewhere, and I've had my fair share of deficiencies in this realm. And it's only through those deficiencies did I eventually wake up and realize, this area of my life is not really going to plan. This is not the kind of relationship I want to have. This is not the outcome I wanted in that situation. So within this, we can see already a path of development laid out before us. We see that these things really hold us back. A low emotional awareness and intelligence really, really limits us. It will limit your capacity to be effective and successful in your career, whatever that is, if it involves people. Even if it's just you. Managing things like loneliness, depression, stress, the expectations that you put on yourself, the desire to have more abundance in your life. There's an emotional component to everything that we do. So even if you're working in isolation and not involved with people, it's about how you manage yourself. And leveling this capacity up and deepening an awareness is super crucial to the success in your business, in your professional life, as well as your most intimate relationships. And we are moving into this era where if we want to stay ahead, if we want to be effective, if we want to actually build the kind of life that is deeply fulfilling, successful, nourishing, meaningful, we need to have a high degree of awareness of the instrument, the vehicle that is actually propelling us through life and taking us in the direction that we're going. So the benefit of working on this is really a much deeper relationship with yourself, a much more accurate, insightful, refined approach towards life and relationships. And as men, and I'll speak from the masculine perspective because this is where I think a lot of guys struggle, is we typically get hit with this message that it's not a masculine trait. It's not a particularly, it's kind of the feminine thing. And I remember my own sort of initial foray into developing emotional intelligence was met with a lot of resistance. And I commonly hear these complaints from men because I often post content like this on this topic, speaking how emotional intelligence is almost this gateway to a deeper state of masculinity. By integrating our sensitive side and learning to really empathize, learning to understand, learning to hold the emotional experiences of ourselves and our lover, that's actually the ability to contain, to be present with, to offer support and structure to our emotions, their emotions, the emotions of others, which actually makes us much more grounded, much more stable, much more mature, because we're no longer this impulsive, selfish, ignorant kind of boy man who's simply focused on his own needs, his own desires getting met. Emotional intelligence informs us, deepens our relationship with the other, with the woman that we're with, which in turn creates much deeper safety. She'll feel much more supported by us, much more seen, much more held, much more understood. And in turn will give us the respect and devotion and love that we long for, because she sees that we're worthy of that. Because we've integrated both sides. We're not just this rigid, hypermasculine guy who is completely stoic, never shows any sign of weakness, never lets a tear fall down his cheek, never lets himself be seen as vulnerable. And my argument is that vulnerability is in fact a tremendous strength, or it shows a tremendous strength in a man, because he has actually integrated his weaknesses. He is aware of his sensitivities, such to the point that he's actually able to expose his weaknesses, knowing that he's strong enough to handle it. Even if someone else doesn't react in the way that he hoped, or has a bad, negative, somehow reaction, he is comfortable within himself and his feelings. He has the deep capacity to regulate and make sense of what he feels. He is also able to support other people during difficult moments or times of emotional dysregulation. And he's not afraid to show up authentically. He's not afraid to show and express the truth of his heart. He's not afraid to admit that he has weaknesses. So he can be strong and real and authentic and open-hearted. This takes true strength in my eyes. This is much more profound than the man who stoically pretends that he doesn't feel anything or doesn't have any weaknesses or nothing upsets him. I call bullshit on that. If a man is saying that, he's numb. And what is numbness? Numbness is a fear of feeling. It's a fear of admitting the truth. It's a fear of exposing oneself, which in fact is a coping strategy. It's a coping mechanism that men have developed because they felt unsafe, because they were not treated with love. They developed strength in order to protect themselves from a world that was unsafe. And that's a natural reaction to a cruel and harsh world. But the important thing is that we don't stop there. We don't stay and continue to believe that the world is always like that. That that's the only way. Yes, the world can be a harsh and cruel place. But people are also capable of tremendous love and empathy and caring and nurture and profound intimacy, and we want to have access to both. If we go too far in the rigid direction of stoicism and clamping down around what we feel and never revealing any of the weaknesses that we have, we wall ourselves off. And that makes it difficult to let people in, which in turn makes it difficult for us to step into other people's shoes, which makes it difficult to create deep emotional intimacy, which is at the end of the day one of the most healing things that we can experience, especially if you've been a man in a world that is unsafe. It's that deep emotional healing and intimacy which actually allows those wounds to gradually get stitched back together. And I'm not saying let's do away with traditional strength. Let's not be naive and think that the world is full of sunshine and rainbows and everyone here is just waiting to look after us and take care of us. No, the world is a brutal place. People will take advantage of you. They will steal your shit. They will scam you out of your money. And they will abuse you if you are too soft and too sensitive. So we need to retain some of that conservative mindset of seeing the realities of the world, and at the same time we need to open ourselves to the capacity and the need within us to heal and to create deep connections and a deep life. So I hope that answers some of your resistances towards this work. Other things that I typically hear men saying is that they've tried it before and it doesn't work, which is a very legitimate thing to say, and there's a truth there. Many, many times you will try and you will open up emotionally to a woman or whoever, and it will backfire magnificently. They will get defensive, they will react in a certain way, they will ridicule you, they will feel triggered by what you said somehow and react in a way which was somehow damaging in return. Yes, it's true. Emotional expression in us can be very triggering for other people too. In fact, this is how most arguments or most conflict starts to arise, is one person feeling unseen, unheard, understood, and triggered by something another person did, having their defensive reaction of pointing at them, blaming them for how we feel or they feel, and then projecting their analysis of the other person or the other side, and then boom, 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 we're off to the races. That only escalates the conflict. So it's true, it can backfire magnificently, and the important thing there is to not stop, is to not think that it's pointless or think just because it happened like that or things didn't go the way we wanted them to or it ended up badly, that's a reason to never do it again. It's also very important the way that we communicate, the way that we express, the way that we understand their reaction and make space for that. And a high degree of emotional intelligence and the ability to communicate effectively in situations where emotions are charged, it develops slowly, and it requires time and patience and many years of development. So yes, sometimes it can be a shit show. Many times it will be. But do you persist? Are you the kind of person that throws their hands up and say, see, I tried it, it didn't work? Or are you the kind of person that is going to self-reflect and think deeply about what you could have done better? Why they might have had that reaction? Put yourself in their shoes and do the emotional work of empathizing with them, and at the same time soothing yourself, regulating and validating the way that this made you feel. Picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and trying again. Of course, there are situations where trying again and again, endlessly becomes a pointless exercise or a futile exercise if the other side is completely unwilling or the situation is devolving into some sort of very toxic dynamic. There are moments when it's better to consciously retreat from a situation and protect yourself. But I hope you see the point here. So another very common complaint that I hear men making is that she will use it against me. If I open up emotionally and start to express myself on that level and make myself vulnerable in any way, the woman I'm with will bookmark that and she'll use it later. It will come out of the library and she will weaponize it and use my emotions, use my vulnerability against me. Yes, it's true. A woman will do that when she's hurt, in the throes of her wounds. She will reach for anything, weaponize it, and use it to try to communicate how much pain she's in. And we as men can react immaturely to that and that's why you should never do it, because she'll use it against you. Big mistake, Should never have done it, I'll never do it again. Or we could realize that at a level of mastery that we can achieve, we can take that and make space for that and understand the deeper motivations that are driving her behavior. Truly empathize with the upset that she's trying to communicate in the only way that she knows how. Although it's unskillful, it's definitely not something that we need to condone. And we can definitely work towards addressing that kind of behavior in the future. But in the moment, she's clearly upset and she's in pain. She's trying to communicate that pain or her unmet need in perhaps the only way that she knows how, just trying to get your attention, trying to help you to wake up, trying to make you aware of how much pain she's in. And we can be forgiving towards that. After all, if we're strong enough within ourselves and we have the deep capacity to hold and regulate what we feel and validate ourselves, it's not going to kill us. We'll be okay. And we can simultaneously be open and empathetic towards her and take a firm stance that this is not okay that she does that. And that is what a emotionally mature person is able to do. I'm not okay with you weaponizing and using my emotions and my vulnerability against me, and at the same time I can see that you're deeply upset and I'm here for you. So if you've tried to be vulnerable, tried to open up emotionally, tried to articulate something and it's backfired, that's a moment to step back, to take a deep breath and reflect, and to hone and sharpen your approach to practice a deeper level of awareness and use it as an opportunity to grow. That's what emotional intelligence is all about. The next complaint or common resistance that I hear is that she will lose attraction for me. If I express myself in that way, the woman that I'm with or my partner will stop seeing me as masculine. She will stop respecting me. She will take advantage of it. She will find some other guy who's more of an alpha or something like this. If the woman that you're with doesn't appreciate you being authentic and you truly expressing the truth of your emotions and your heart, she's not the woman you need to be with. If that's the case, she has something to look at there. If she wants to be with a man who suppresses what he feels, pretends it doesn't exist, puts on a facade of having it all together all the time and being strong, it's a fantasy. It's not the truth. So recognize that. And if she shames you for that, if she loses attraction for you, if she runs off with someone else, that's not a rejection. That is a redirection which shows you that she's not the kind of woman that you want to be with. Personally, I want to be with a woman who appreciates me and loves me for who I am, not who I pretend to be. I want the kind of relationship where I can show up truly, authentically as myself. And as a man who is working through people-pleasing tendencies and nice guy syndrome, I need that. I need someone who sees me for who I am and appreciates me and loves me the way that I am, with my flaws, my quirks, my rough edges, and my qualities. It's a prerequisite for a truly amazing relationship, and you shouldn't, or I don't like to use the word shouldn't. Why would you want less than the best? Why would you settle for someone who doesn't accept you for the way that you are? If she wants to be with someone else, that's fine. We wish her well, good luck. We are looking for something deeper, something more profound, something truly authentic, real love. A deeply healthy relationship where we get to show up as ourselves. So this kind of leads me into my experiences with emotional intelligence, and I wanted to share a story and my perspective and how I reached this work and what it's done for me, in the hope that this inspires you and also motivates you and gives you a fresh perspective and a new way of approaching this, and some of the insights that I've gathered along the way. So in the beginning of my relationship, as I've talked about in previous episodes, I was emotionally avoidant. I'm actually very sensitive and I feel a lot. But I developed coping mechanisms and strategies to pretend that I didn't and that I don't. And that I was always fine, always good, never a problem, nothing wrong with me, and sacrificing my needs in order to keep others happy and to win their approval. So obviously this doesn't fly in a relationship where you actually want to go deeper and you're with someone who's also committed to being authentic and having a deep relationship. So at a certain point I realized, okay, this is something I need to work on. I am kind of running away from what I'm feeling. And I started to work with my feelings, started to try to label them. This is one of the prerequisites for starting to develop more emotional awareness, is learning to self-reflect, learning to label, learning to be more mindful of what's happening inside your experience. And I found myself at a loss for the words to even put a label on what I was feeling. And I remember the first time I felt jealousy. There was a situation with my lover being chased by another man, and he was trying to seduce her. And clearly it upset me. I wasn't okay with that and pretended like it wasn't such an issue, and clearly it was obvious. And I remember she asked me, what are you feeling? How does it make you feel? And I had to sit with it for a while, 5-7 minutes or something, really just like feeling like, what is that? And previously I was a person who was like, I don't get jealous. Typical avoidant. I don't get jealous. It doesn't affect me, whatever. I don't care. And when I really started to connect to it, I rose at that feeling and I was like, fuck, I'm jealous. And it was almost like a new pathway opened up in my mind, and I was like, I connected the feeling with the label. And since then I've done that many, many times. Something my partner Natalie pointed me towards was the emotional wheel. You can Google it. A very simple chart that has the map of emotional experience, kind of in a very easy to organize and color-coded way to refine the emotional experience of what you're actually experiencing. And I thought it was the stupidest thing ever when she first told me about it. I was like, the emotional wheel, that sounds so silly. And then one day when I was struggling to understand what I was feeling, I opened it up and I started casting my eyes around it, looking at it, and I was like, neglect. I feel neglected. The first time in my life where I ever put a word to the feeling. And this happened many, many other times until I started to really map out my emotional intelligence. Essentially, the emotional wheel is a kind of map of the labels of emotional intelligence. And I started to see that I could have contradictory emotions. I could be sad and angry. I could feel neglected and full of sorrow. I could feel disgust and be deeply caring at the same time. So I learned that actually this was super useful because it gave me something to express. It gave me words to actually bring content, useful content that I could bring to a conversation, bring to a discussion about what was happening, a situation, a conflict. I actually had a place to begin. Instead of saying, I don't know, I'm fine, whatever, it's all good, forget about it, I actually had content to bring and say, hey, actually I'm feeling neglected and I'm jealous. Which is something relatable. Then she has something to actually relate to. Instead of me being numb and checked out and avoidant and pushing her away, there's an openness, there's a door there, there's a truth that she can empathize with. Which really changed the way that we started to relate. The relationship became much deeper, gradually. The intimacy unfolded. We started to access and build much deeper trust, work through a lot of the wounds and dysfunctional patterns that we inherited from childhood and that were playing out in our relationship, and it really helped us to make sense and find very proactive, productive ways to move forward with our relationship. These skills carried over into the work that I do now, into coaching, to working with men, because I was able to empathize with them, understand them, support them on a much deeper level because I had developed that depth within myself. And I understood and I had this insight that we will only ever be able to meet others to the depth at which we're able to meet ourselves. And as my emotional intelligence started to deepen and expand, I started to understand other people in a much deeper way. I started to connect a lot more of the dots. I started to really understand myself first and foremost, because I understood how my patterns were all connected, how my behavior was a reflection of so much of my conditioning, why I reacted the way that I did, how I could manage that and develop that and get better at that, which had huge implications for my relationship, my professional life, the work that I do. Everything started to shift. So it's within this kind of exploration and through my direct experience of life and how this impacted my life that I really understood this was a deep necessity for anyone who is wanting to develop themselves from a personal growth and development point of view, from a relational point of view, from a spiritual point of view. And unlike traditional forms of intelligence, IQ, which is thought to be static and pretty much fixed, EQ is highly fluid and flexible. It's something we can develop and hone and sharpen and really build. And don't you want to be more intelligent? Don't you want to be more socially adapted? Don't you want to have deeper relationships and more fulfilling relationships that actually heal you and support you to go out there and transform your life, the lives of those that you love and other people, to have an impact on the world? some of the most influential people in the world, and I would argue that most, have very well developed levels of emotional intelligence. Examples that come to mind are people like Barack Obama. As a US president, I think he showed a different level of quality of character and his ability to negotiate and motivate and influence people. Very diplomatic. Say what you will about his policies and how his presidency went, but as a person, I think he has a high degree of emotional intelligence. Tony Robbins is another great example. Look at how that man mobilizes the entire energy and mental state of an entire crowd, thousands of people. So charismatic, so inspiring, magnetic. This wouldn't be possible without a high degree of emotional intelligence, where he's able to really almost hack his emotional state to bring this energy to really influence people and impact them with his aliveness. What is that? It's energy. It's the energy of his emotions that is just impacting. It's deeply inspiring. Just listen to the man for 5 or 10 minutes, watch him speak, and you'll see he's not just a robot. He's not just a mental 1 + 1 = 2. He is a complex, emotionally charged, motivated, very internally resourced being. And we can look at more spiritual examples like the Dalai Lama, who I think expresses and shows a high degree of empathy and compassion, which shows a degree to be able to put yourself in the shoes of others, to be able to care, to be very grateful, to achieve higher spiritual states. And this shows in a certain way the emotional intelligence pathways can be very different. You can take it in the direction of career and politics. You can take it in the direction of personal growth and development, traditional personal growth and development. You can take it in the direction of spirituality. Really, it defines your success in any direction that you want to go. So that brings me to the next point I wanted to make, which was really offering you guys some practical tips and directions for developing this capacity within yourself, of course. So what comes next? So on this list are some things which I identified and found particularly useful in this direction of developing this part of myself. First of all, fundamental skill set and practice is self-reflection. Are you able to look within yourself and start to identify sensations, emotions, feelings, thoughts, and seeing these as an experience that is occurring within you? You can do things like journaling. Having conversations about these topics is very, very powerful. You can use the other person as a mirror to show stuff about yourself and then think about it. Sit with it. Reflect on it. Mindfulness practices ties into this, so meditating, deep relaxation, contemplation will really help to hone and develop these capacities within you. I did a lot of meditation, a lot of yoga, which can be a double-edged sword. We can use spiritual practices to bypass what we're feeling, spiritually bypassing. I'll talk about that in another episode. But the mechanics are very good, especially if it's combined with this direction of study and inquiry and interest. Active listening, practice really empathizing and listening deeply to the person opposite you, whoever that is, putting yourself in their shoes. trying to understand what they're feeling, finding that experience somehow within yourself as well, reflecting it back to them, sharing what you see, what you feel, what you hear. Very beautiful and powerful practice, which will redefine the way that you do conflict in your relationships and how you manage difficult situations that are emotionally charged, is active listening. We can also seek feedback from others. As I said, the other is a mirror, and the people that we have closest to us are the closest mirrors that see a lot about us, so we can really seek feedback from others to help understand our mechanisms, understand how our reactions landed for them, ask them what they see, ask them for help. One of the most powerful things you can do is ask your partner for their curiosity. Hey, I'm working on my emotional intelligence. I realize this is a potent area of development for me that will really impact my life. I would love it if you just asked me every now and then what I'm feeling. Be curious. One of the greatest gifts that Natalie gave me was that tender curiosity towards my feelings, which forced me to then pull this stuff out of myself and share it with her, which transformed our relationship. And it was reciprocated, of course. It went both ways. So we can really practice empathizing as well, so putting ourselves in the shoes of others and doing this kind of thought experiment with this emotional component. Whenever I have a conflict, whenever we have an argument, I come home into my room, into myself, into my body, and I validate what I'm feeling. Whatever is alive inside of me, I validate the shit out of that and just allow it to be there and tell myself it makes sense, it's okay, it's good. Of course, I feel this way. And that calms me down. Once I feel calm, then the natural next step for me is to be curious about her experience. What must she be feeling? How did that situation unfold for her? Why was she so upset? What did that mean for her? Or how did that land for her? Whatever I said. So we practice this, we flex the empathy muscle and start practicing putting ourselves in the shoes of others. This will rapidly improve your emotional awareness and intelligence, and through that your emotional mastery. So emotional regulation, as I've talked about, this ability to sit with and validate and regulate what you feel, it's a skill. It's something to practice. Every time I get upset, every time I have an emotional situation unfold, or I feel triggered or charged emotionally, I try to sit with it. I start by labeling it. If I need to, I pull open the emotional wheel and I look at that thing until I have some labels. And then I sit with and start to regulate, start to calm myself down and soothe myself. It's very, very simple. But man, this has changed so much for me, so much. Really, really rapidly improved my capacity to contain my emotional experience, manage my emotions, and then choose a wiser path of action instead of just reacting impulsively or projecting my emotions elsewhere and just blaming the other person. That's childish behavior. We want to be better than that. If you want to be an adult, if you want to be a man or a person who has a certain capacity and maturity, we need to develop that maturity, and emotional regulation is one of the simplest and most effective ways to do that. So social skill development is another area we can practice, just becoming more calibrated socially, getting better at holding conversations, better at listening to others, better at asking questions, better at managing conflict and, communication. It's a huge skill, which we'll talk a lot about. I have other episodes on this topic exclusively to talk about this. And the last area is therapy and coaching. So working with someone in a dedicated fashion, someone who is trained and who has a high degree of awareness of these things and practices and guided exercises, and can really help you to understand at a very deep level how to build this capacity into your life, how to work with the unique situations, the relationships, the whatever's happening in your world, and how to have a structured approach towards working through those things, managing those situations, improving those situations. Coaching and therapy can be game changers, absolute game changers. If you've never done this before, it's definitely worth exploring, especially if you have a lifetime or many decades of unprocessed emotional baggage that you are like dragging behind you through life. Coaching and therapy can be one of the fastest ways to clear the decks, work through all of that stuff, and through that process learn a tremendous amount about yourself by integrating all of those things, bringing them from the subconscious into the conscious mind. Very, very powerful. Having worked with hundreds of men on these topics, regularly hearing men say this was one of the best experiences or the best things that I've done, just confirms that for me, that this work is just incredibly powerful. And for those that haven't had that experience yet and want to get professional guidance and structure towards not leaving it up to chance, but actually cultivating it in a very conscious way, can't recommend it highly enough. So that brings us towards the end of this episode, and hopefully by now you feel inspired, motivated. Hopefully some of the dots have connected for you in your mind about this topic. You can see why this is such a potent and powerful direction of inquiry and self-study and practice within your professional and personal lives. This topic is something I focus on exclusively in the courses that I run, in my coaching containers that I offer. If that's ever something you're interested in, keep following my work and I'll be sharing more details about that very soon. For now, I want to thank you for your presence, for listening, for tuning into this episode. I hope you will subscribe and follow this channel and rate it. Give it a like, that helps me a lot to grow this work. Lastly, I just want to leave you with this idea and somehow the bigger picture on this, which is really understanding that emotional intelligence and emotional mastery is one of the fundamental pillars that we need in order to approach life in an intelligent way. If you neglect this work, if you never focus on it or you don't develop it to a high degree, you will be at a significant disadvantage. You will struggle to understand yourself, other people. You will struggle to build the kind of deep relationship that is based on growth and healing that you need in order to optimize yourself and your life to the highest levels. Because we want to have a very powerful, healthy, stable relationship that actually supports us to go out there and focus on our life purpose, to focus on our professional development, to focus on our spiritual growth. So developing this emotional intelligence and awareness and mastery is like the gritty work. It's like the daily grind work that actually is taking you towards the highest levels of growth and development, and through that, the highest experience of life. This is fundamental, like building block material as a skill set, as an awareness, as a pursuit of knowledge that will really dictate the outcomes of your life. It's very easy to see people who haven't developed this side of themselves and they stick out. They have dysfunctional relationships, they have low levels of self-awareness, and they have mediocre lives. This channel is all about optimizing ourselves to the highest level. So if you are on that train and you want to step along this path, do not neglect your emotional development. It's one of the most important things. Because if you do not master your emotions, they will master you. And you'll be at the mercy of them for the rest of your life. Choose the higher path and develop this. Take it on as a life's work, as a life's commitment. Because at its core, it is understanding yourself. And if we follow that thread, we understand everything. Because through the self, an entire understanding of reality becomes possible. And that's where we're going. That's the work we're doing. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you feel inspired by this and motivated to get out there and start doing the work. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you guys in the next one.